Welcome back. President Trump keeping his sights set on health care and a deal and making it a top priority. In my exclusive interview this past week with President Donald Trump on the Fox Business Network, the president said health care has to come before tax reform. Congressman Ron DeSantis of Florida is a member of the House Freedom Caucus, and he sits on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And Congressman, it's wonderful for you to join us, especially when so many of your colleagues are on vacation. Thank you very much for being here this morning.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you. Let me kick it off with such an important part of that interview with the president earlier this week. I want to get your reaction to this. Listen to what he said about health care and then tax reform. Congressman.
We're going to have a phenomenal tax reform, but I have to do health care first. I want to do it first to really do it right.
But do you have to do health care before tax reform?
Yes.
When I speak with business managers, they say tax reform is so much more impactful to moving the needle on economic growth.
They're
so why
all right, but because I'm saving a tremendous amount, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars we're saving on health care. So we're going to have a much better plan than Obamacare, which is failing. So we're saving tremendous amounts of money on health care when we get this done. Number one, and most importantly, actually, we're going to have great health care, and all of that saving goes into the tax.
Okay, so Congressman, before this, we all thought that once the GOP bill failed in the House, that you were going to change your focus and you were going to turn immediately to tax reform. Now we know the tax reform is hostage to health care reform. What is stopping you from going forward on health care reform, sir?
Well, Maria, I think if you look at when that bill failed, we had only spent 17 days on it. And we've been promising for 7 years as a party that we were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. That bill didn't quite get there. I think the CBO said it would increase insurance premiums 15 to 20% over the next 3 years. That would have been a disaster if that would have happened. And so I think a lot of people looked at the bill and said, we need to do something about lowering premiums and giving people a chance to purchase the plans they want. That is why people don't like Obamacare, because of the cost and the restrictions on prices. And so the White House has been doing a lot of good work behind the scenes, working with members of Congress, from the Vice President to the White House staff, and they've generated a number of ideas that I would be comfortable with, because I think it would provide relief to consumers. And so I think it's important to do it. Obviously, we do want to do tax reform, and I agree that the tax reform and lowering those rates is going to be more impactful for economic growth, although Obamacare is a drag as well. But I think you got to get the Obamacare right and get the repeal right. If we can do that, I think that'll give us a huge amount of momentum going into tax reform.
Yeah, he was very specific on that. He said $900 billion in savings once you overturn all of the Obamacare taxes in the Affordable Care Act. That will go toward paying for tax cuts. Is that the plan?
Well, I think so. I mean, when you do this in Washington, they score these things, and so we're kind of held hostage to a certain extent to how they run the numbers. I actually think that's a mistake, because I think a lot of these numbers don't end up bearing out to be accurate, but you basically have more slack with tax reform. So if you're talking about real significant reductions in business tax rates, which we need to do because we're not competitive internationally, you're going to have the ability to drive those rates down further. I mean, I'd like to see, the president said 15%. I think that's a good target. The House bill, I think, is 20%. Either one, I think, would be a huge improvement over where we are now.
You made a really important point just there when you brought up the 15%. I want to get back to it in a second. But let me follow up on health care. If you were to see this health care bill mean lower premiums and the taxes eliminated, that savings of all of that $900 billion, will you vote yes to this health care bill? Can you get this done soon?
Oh, yeah, look, if we're able to give people relief from the onerous Obamacare regulations and mandates such that premiums will come down and people will be able to choose plans that are good for them, not what the government tells them they should have, then that's the whole ballgame. And so I'd be happy to vote for a bill like that.
All right, you just mentioned 15%. We know that is what the president campaigned on. 15% corporate tax rate. We know that Paul Ryan's plan in the House is 20%. Why should we believe that you're going to get a tax deal done when health care just failed? Aren't you going to have the same battle when it all comes down to it over 15% corporate tax rate versus 20%, over possible border adjustment tax, over deductions that everybody wants to hold on to their deductions and they have their lobbying groups? Isn't there a lot of battles right now brewing over this tax reform package as well? How do we know you're going to get that done?
Well, no, I think you're right. To me, the 15 to 20% won't be a deal breaker, because that's so far in the right direction that I think that's just something that you take if you get 20 instead of 15. But I think you're right. When you start hearing people talk about carbon tax, a border tax, and some of these new taxes, that does make it much more difficult because I think Republicans didn't campaign on any of that. And so I think that we've always said with tax reform, we want to really dramatically lower the rates, get rid of some of the deductions and loopholes, which I agree with you can be challenging. And so you're broadening the base. And so if it's within that framework, I think we can get there. When you start talking about things that have been floated like a carbon tax, that makes it way more difficult because a lot of Republicans just aren't going to go for that.
Well, a lot of Republicans are not going to go for eliminating the property deduction, eliminating the state income deduction. A lot of congressmen have told me they can't sign anything if those two things are eliminated. Let me ask you this. Who's going to be responsible if, I mean, the thing about the Republicans is they all stand on their own principles. You're not going to vote for something that you don't agree with. And then there's just, you know, backup. And the clock is ticking, sir. The Democrats get all in line. They just move it forward. Who's going to be responsible if nothing gets done in 2017? Health care and tax reform. Is there any way you would allow that to happen?
I don't think we can allow that to happen. I think that with health care, we've campaigned so hard against Obamacare. And let's just be clear, we would never have won the House or the Senate unless we were opposed to Obamacare. That was really the key issue. And so to just walk away after 17 days is not acceptable. We got to get it right. It's not always easy. You may have to take a tough vote or two, but that's just the way that it goes. Taxes, I think that we have a good path. There are a lot of complications. I think the key is are Democrats going to help at all with taxes? They may not. I think they've gone really in the direction of the...
Shouldn't you assume they're not? Don't you need to be unified without the Dems? They're not there now. They haven't been there at all.
I think you're probably right, and so that obviously makes it more difficult. You know, when Reagan did the tax reform in '86, he got 90 votes in the Senate. That's inconceivable that would happen today because I think they've gone in the direction of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren flavor of liberalism. So the taxes, we're probably going to have to do it ourselves, but it would be nice to get some of these moderate Democrats, say in the Senate, to help us doing things which really will increase our economic growth rate, which that's going to be good for everyone when that happens.
And that's certainly a priority of the administration. All right, Congressman, we'll be watching. I know you have a lot on your plate. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah.